in order for some of us to wake up, we need a wake-up call. And in 1986, I got the call. I was in a triathlon in Palm Springs, California, and I was in the biking portion of the race. And I was coming up to this intersection, and there were two cyclists that were turning onto another road. And there was a police officer that was standing on the opposite side, and he was pointing at me, and he was telling me to turn and to merge onto this road. And so I was locked in on him, and I wasn't paying attention to the road. And the problem was he had his back to the oncoming traffic. So as I made the turn, a four-wheel drive Bronco going about 55 miles an hour hit me from behind and catapulted me out of my bicycle. And I landed on my lower back and my buttocks. And when you land very hard, the compressive force basically puts a downward pressure on the vertebrae. And the compressive force compressed 6 vertebrae in my spine. The 8th thoracic vertebrae, the 9th thoracic vertebrae, 10, 11, 12, and the first lumbar vertebrae. And when you compress volume like that, the matter has to go somewhere. And in my case, it went back towards my spinal cord. One of the vertebrae, the 8th thoracic vertebrae, was more than 60% collapsed, and the neural arch, where the spinal cord passed through, had broken like a pretzel. So I had multiple compression fractures of my thoracic spine and upper lumbar spine. I had bone fragments on my spinal cord, and I had compression of the cord because of the neural arch being fractured. And so they took me to the hospital, and I had 4 opinions from 4 of the leading surgeons in Southern California, and the prognosis was I'd probably never walk again, and that I needed a radical surgery called the Harrington rod surgery. And in Harrington rod surgery, they basically cut off the back parts of your vertebrae. They screw in these long stainless steel rods. And by screwing those rods in there, they cantilever and pull the spinal column off the spinal cord, and it opens up the pathway. And then they take bone fragments from your hip and they paste it over the top, and they hope for the best. So in my case, it would be from the base of my neck to the base of my spine because of the number of vertebrae that were compressed. And so I think that if this had been anybody else, I probably would have recommended that they have the surgery. But this was me. And I wasn't so quick, based on the x-rays and the CAT scans and MRIs, to just decide to have the surgery. And so I think one of the biggest things about making a choice when you're indecisive, it's one of the difficult times because you're weighing what you know against what you don't know. And you reach this point in your life where it's like a dark night of the soul, because when you realize that nobody has the answers to your problems but you, then you start this process of stepping out into the unknown. Now, in 1986, in Southern California, not a lot of people were going against convention, whether it was scientific convention or medical convention or social convention or religious convention. But I think that when you step outside of a convention, that's the definition of a miracle. So when you do something like that, you're always considered foolhardy or insane until you pull it off, and then you're a saint or a mystic or a genius. So I decided for myself personally that I was willing to step out into the unknown, that I couldn't imagine myself living on addictive medications for the rest of my life or being in a wheelchair. And so I decided to check out of the hospital. And I just had this one thought, and the thought was the power that made the body heals the body. And I couldn't stop thinking about that because I knew that there's an intelligence that's giving us life, that keeps our heart beating and digesting our food. And that consciousness is awareness, and awareness is paying attention. So it must be observing or paying attention to who I am. So I decided that I was going to make contact with this intelligence. And I was going to give it a plan, a template, a design. I was going to get very specific on what I wanted. And when I was happy with my creation, I was going to surrender this creation to a greater mind because it knows how to heal way better than I do. And the second thing I said was I'm not going to let any thought slip by my awareness that I don't want to experience. Now, this sounds really easy from an intellectual standpoint, But I learned very quickly that I couldn't get my mind to do what I wanted it to do. And when we're in crisis or trauma, like I was, we tend to focus on what we don't want to have happen instead of what we do want to have happen. So out of the infinite potentials that exist for us as human beings, I was selecting the worst case scenario over and over again in my mind and embracing that emotionally and being prepared for that event, because if anything less happened, I would have better chances of survival. And I think when we're in crisis, it's those survival chemicals, those hormones of stress that prepare us for the worst case scenario. So I would start off in my mind reconstructing my spine vertebrae per vertebrae, and then I'd start thinking about living in a wheelchair. And then I'd become aware that I was focusing on what I don't want to have happen instead of what I do want to have happen, and I'd stop and realize that I'd have to start all over. And the reason being was because this intelligence is a presence. And just like when you know someone is present with you, they're paying attention to you, and you know when they're not, and they're distracted. So I reasoned that I had to be completely present with it, and it had to get a very clear signal, a very clear plan. So I would start all over again and start reconstructing my spine, and then I'd start thinking about, should I sell my home, should I sell my practice? And I'd stop again, become conscious, and then I'd get frustrated, and then I'd get impatient, and then I'd get angry, and then it would just get worse. And so for 6 weeks, I went through this incredible dark night of the soul because I couldn't really get my mind to do what I wanted it to do. And it would take me about 3 hours in closing my eyes and reconstructing every single vertebrae and starting over again every time I lost my attention. And then I was never satisfied really with the way it was, way I did it, but I would just keep going. At the end of 6 weeks, I went through the whole entire process without losing my attention. And it was like I hit a tennis ball in a sweet spot. Something clicked in that moment. I clicked. And I knew in that moment that something happened. And what was taking me 3 hours to do, I was able to do in 45 minutes. And at the time, I didn't know it, but I was firing and wiring new circuits in my brain every single day. And I was literally improving my ability to pay attention. And attention is a skill, just like golf or tennis. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. So I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't doing anything. I was basically laying face down, and I had a lot of time on my hands, so this was the object of my affection. At that time, when I was able to go through that whole rehearsal, I started noticing significant changes in my body. My pain levels dropped and diminished immediately. Some of the neurological problems I was having were improving. Numbness, tingling, my motor functions started coming back. And the moment I correlated what I was doing inside of me with the effect that I was producing outside of me, I started paying attention to what I was doing and did it with more passion and more enthusiasm instead of dread and frustration. And it was that elevated emotion that I started to realize that was actually the catalyst to make it fun and easy. And then I just started thinking about if I was ever able to walk again, what did I take for granted, like a sunset or a shower or sitting with my friends and enjoying a meal. And all of a sudden I started selecting potentials in the quantum field that were no longer based on the worst case scenario, but really some future possibility. And I began to emotionally embrace and experience it completely, whether it was a sunset on the beach or a shower. I would live it and emotionally feel it. And I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I think when you combine a clear intention with an elevated emotion, you move your body and brain from living in the past to living in the future. And the brain and body actually don't know the difference when you're truly focused and paying attention between what's going on in your outer world and what's going on in your inner world. And the very process of the elevated emotion began to convince my body that I was living in that future reality in the present moment, because the body's the unconscious mind, it doesn't know the difference. That I began to signal new genes in new ways, and my body began to change dramatically. And I was back on my feet in 10 weeks, and back training again at 12 weeks, and I'd never have any pain in my body or in my back, and I just made a deal with myself, and the deal was with this intelligence that if I was ever able to walk again, I'd spend the rest of my life studying the mind-body connection and mind over matter, and pretty much that's what I've been doing since 1986.
Amazing. I was just going to have you do kind of a overview of how our thoughts and emotions affect our biology.
Okay.
And can either create disease or return us back to health, homeostasis.
Okay. So, one of the privileges of being a human being is that we can make thought more real than anything else, and we do it all the time. And because of the size of the frontal lobe is the creative center. It's the crowning achievement of the human being. It's 40% of our entire brain. That's the workshop. That's the place where we imagine, we speculate, we create, we intend, we have attention, we restrain emotional reactions, we decide who we're going to be. And that part of the brain is where our conscience sits. And when we begin to think about a better way of being, a new possibility in our life, that forebrain begins to turn on. And because it has connections to all other parts of the brain, like a symphony leader, it begins to call up different networks of neurons from knowledge we've gained in the past or experiences that we've had, and seamlessly pieces them together to create a vision. We call that an intent. And when we begin to combine new networks of neurons firing in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations, we begin to change our mind, because mind is the brain in action. So we naturally do this. We naturally begin to think about a new way of being. The problem is that most people don't combine that intention with an elevated emotion. The moment you begin to experience that future reality in the present moment, the end product of an experience is called a feeling or an emotion. And the body begins to believe it's living in that future reality. The repetition of that cycle over time begins to fire and wire new circuits in new ways to cause your brain to look like the experience has already occurred. The elevated emotion tends to signal the body in actively instructing and selecting new genes to make new proteins to prepare the body for the event. So, why is that important? The significance of that is that the brain is organized to reflect everything you know in your life. Your brain is a record of the past. It's an artifact of everything you've learned and experienced to this moment. So if you're waking up every single morning and you come back to your senses and you go through a series of routine behaviors and choices and experiences that were exactly like yesterday, you see the same people, you go to the same places, you do the exact same things at the exact same time. It's your external environment that's turning on different circuits in your brain, causing you to think and feel equal to everything that you know. Now, if you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your health or your destiny, as long as you're thinking the same way, you keep creating the same life. So then, if the brain is a record of the past, then most people who are not being defined by a vision of the future are left with the old memories of the past, and so they think in the past. And if feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences, and we can remember experiences better because we can remember how we feel, if you're waking up every single morning feeling the exact same way as you did days before, number one, it means nothing new is happening in your life. And if those feelings and emotions that are the end product of past experiences drive your very thoughts and your very behaviors, then you're thinking and acting in the past and you'll become predictable. So then if those emotions are driving certain thoughts, and those thoughts are creating certain emotions, and those emotions are driving certain thoughts, the repetition of that cycle of thinking and feeling begins to create a state of being. In other words, thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates a state of being. So most people have experiences in their life that brand them emotionally. They feel fear, they feel anger, they feel bitterness, they feel frustration, they feel insecurity. And those emotions then become part of their identity. So once they think certain thoughts that turn on certain circuits in their brain that are equal to their insecurity, and then they feel insecure. The moment they feel insecure, they think more insecure thoughts, which makes more chemicals for them to feel insecure. And the repetition of that cycle over time conditions the body to subconsciously become the mind of insecurity. So then the person says, I am insecure. And whenever you say, I am anything, you're commanding your mind and body towards a destiny. So then most people's biology is, for the most part, their past. And so if you're not being defined by the vision of the future, some new possibility in your life, you're only left with the old circuitry in your brain and the old emotions of the past. So the question then is, can you believe in a future that you can't see or experience with your senses yet, but you've thought about enough times in your mind that your brain is literally changed to look like the experience has already occurred? Now, the latest research in neuroscience says you can change your brain just by thinking. So then, as you begin to think about a new possibility, and your brain begins to fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations, and you begin to plan your behaviors, and you begin to review in your mind, mentally rehearse who you're going to be in your life, the mere action of mental rehearsal begins to install the neurological circuits in your brain, the hardware, to look like the event has already occurred. If you keep revisiting that same thought and that same sequence, the hardware becomes a software program. Now your brain is no longer a record of the past. Now it's in fact a map to the future. And if you were then to begin to emotionally embrace your future before it's made manifest, in other words, you're not waiting for your healing to feel wholeness. You're not waiting for your new relationship to feel love. You're not waiting for the mystical moment to feel awe. You're not waiting for your success to feel empowered. That's the old model of reality, of cause and effect. Waiting for something outside of us to change how we feel inside of us. And then when we feel differently inside of us, we pay attention to whoever or whatever caused that. That's a memory. That's how we create associative memories. But this model is about causing an effect, which means you have to feel awe for the mystical moment to occur. You have to become empowered in order to create your success. You have to feel wholeness in order for your healing to occur. We have to feel love for ourselves and love for life in order for us to have love in our life. And so then to instruct people how to teach their body emotionally how that future could feel like before it's made manifest, if they do it properly, their body as the unconscious mind begins to believe it's living in that future reality in the present moment, and they're beginning to signal new genes in new ways that begins to change their body to look like the event has already occurred. So can you then select a new potential in the quantum field, infinite potentials in the quantum field, and begin to emotionally embrace that future reality before it's made manifest to such a degree that your body as the unconscious mind is believing it's living in that future reality in the present moment, and you're changing your body by thought alone. Now, if there's physical evidence, neurologically, biologically, chemically, genetically, in your brain and body to look like the experience has already occurred, then relax, because the experience is going to find you, and it's going to come in a way that you least expect. Now, this is the significance of that. It has to come in a way that we least expect, because if we can expect it, it's nothing new. It's more of the known. It has to catch us off guard. It has to surprise us, and it has to leave no doubt that what we've done inside of us produces some effect outside of us. And when we can correlate the changes we've made inside of us with the effects we've produced outside of us, we pay attention to what we've done and we do it again. And that's called human empowerment. And I don't think there's a person in the world that's so special to be excluded from this phenomenon. So, common people around the world right now are doing the uncommon, because I think this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. And if you can combine the latest research in quantum physics with neuroscience and neuroplasticity and neuroendocrinology and psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics, all of those sciences point the finger at possibility. And so learning it is one thing. That's philosophy. It's theory. It's knowledge. It's analytical information. But when you take that information and you apply it, you personalize it, you demonstrate it, it means you're going to have to initiate some actions. And when you begin to change your behaviors, and you can get your behaviors to match your intentions, you are going to have a new experience. Now, philosophy, learning information, creates new synaptic connections in the brain. That's what learning is. Learning is forging new circuits. Remembering is maintaining them. But when you take that philosophical information and you begin to apply it to your life, if you do it properly, you should have a new experience. And the new experience then, through all of the sensory feedback from your environment, begins to enrich the circuits in your brain. And when those circuits string into place, the brain makes a chemical, and that chemical is called a feeling or an emotion. The moment you feel the emotion from the experience, now you're teaching your body chemically to understand what your mind has intellectually understood. So we could say that knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body. And in that moment, you're embodying that philosophy. You're embodying the truth of that knowledge. And that's when you begin to upregulate new genes and downregulate old genes, and you begin to rewrite the program, which means the book on compassion is no longer theory. You're feeling compassionate. The book on leadership is no longer philosophical information. You're becoming a leader. The book on a patient parent is no longer just about some conversation about how you're going to be more patient. You actually feel like you're overcoming your impatience. So if you're able to do that once, then you should be able to reproduce it. And if you can reproduce it over and over again, the same experience, you will begin to neurochemically condition your body to know how to do it as well as your mind. And when your body knows as well as your mind, or the mind and body merge as one, now it's innate in you. It's who you are. It's second nature. You've done it so many times that you no longer have to consciously think about it. It's become a subconscious program. And now you're memorizing an internal neurochemical order that's greater than any condition in your external environment, and that's when you begin to master that philosophy. So our job, I think, is to go from philosopher to initiate to master, from knowledge to experience to wisdom, from mind to body to soul, and from thinking to doing to being. And we have all the biological and neurological machinery to do this. I think the biggest problem that stands in the way for us doing this over and over again and doing it really well is pretty much the hormones of stress. And stress is when your body is knocked out of homeostasis. The stress response is what your body innately does to return itself back to order. And we have three basic stresses. We have physical stress like accidents, injuries, falls, traumas. We have chemical stress like bacteria and viruses and hormones and foods and heavy metals and hangovers and blood sugar levels. And then we have emotional stress, and that's family tragedies, loss, job, finances. And all of those things knock our brain and body out of balance. All organisms in nature can tolerate short-term stress. A pack of coyotes chases a deer. If the deer outruns the coyotes, 15 minutes later she turns back into grazing. She goes back into foraging and grazing, and the stress response is over. But human beings, we're so unique because we can turn on the stress response just by thought alone. We could think about something that's happened in our past, or we can worry about something that's going to happen in the future. And by thought alone, we turn on those same chemicals. And when you turn on the stress response and you can't turn it off, now you're headed for some type of disease, because no organism in nature can live in emergency mode for an extended period of time. So, to answer your question, if you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, and it's a scientific fact that the hormones of stress downregulate genes to create disease, then it means that your thoughts can literally make you sick. So the fundamental question is, if your thoughts can make you sick, is it possible that your thoughts can make you well?
Can you explain what meditation does and what happens in the mind and brain?
Sure. So the word meditation literally means to become familiar with. So here's the old self, and here's the new self. And it's not like we just waltz over to the new self in a matter of days. We have to go through this transformation that takes place. And if 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old is a set of subconscious behaviors, automatic habits, emotional reactions, beliefs, perceptions, and attitudes that function like a computer program, that's 95% of who we are, where the body has been programmed to become the mind. That's what a habit is. And we're going to begin to change with the 5% of our conscious mind. You can imagine that you can think positively all you want, but if you feel negatively, because you've been feeling that way for the last 30 years, mind and body are in opposition. You could create the most fabulous dream board in the world with all the things you want in your life, but if you feel unworthy, that's mind and body in opposition. The idea then is to recondition the body to a new mind. So here's the old self and here's the new self. And you're going to embark on change. The moment you decide to no longer think a certain way, to act a certain way, or to feel a certain way, you are going to step into this river of change. Because the hardest part about change is not making the same choice as you did the day before. So we think 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day. Out of those 60 to 70,000 thoughts that we think in one day, 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before. Now, the same thoughts always lead to the same choices. The same choices always lead to the same behaviors. The same behaviors create the same experiences, and the same experiences produce the same emotions. And those emotions drive our very same thoughts. And our biology, our neurocircuitry, our neurochemistry, our neurohormones, and even our genetic expression stays exactly the same. So now, there's a principle in neuroscience that says that nerve cells that fire together wire together. If you keep thinking the same way, keep making the same choices, keep demonstrating the same behaviors, keep reproducing the same experiences that stamp the same networks of neurons into the same patterns, all for the familiar feeling that you've grown accustomed to called you, then you begin to hardwire your brain into a very finite signature. And that finite signature becomes our identity, almost like a box in the brain. There's no literal box in the brain, but it's the most commonly fired, neurologically wired set of thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through frequent repetition. So how you think, how you act, and how you feel is called your personality. And your personality creates your personal reality. That's it. So then, if you wanted to create a new personal reality, a new life, you'd have to change your personality, which means you'd have to start thinking about what you've been thinking about and change it. You'd have to become aware of your unconscious habits and behaviors and even what you say and modify them. And then you'd have to look at those emotions that keep you anchored to the past and decide if those emotions belong in your future. So most people try to create a new personal reality as the same personality, and it doesn't work. We literally have to become someone else. So the word meditation then means to become familiar with. So if you're sitting in a meditation and you're observing the thoughts that have been going on behind the scenes of your awareness because you've been too distracted by your external environment, and now you're becoming conscious of your unconscious thoughts, and they're becoming familiar to you, now you're in a meditation to know thyself. If you're becoming aware of your propensities and your urges, and the body wanting to get up and do things, and you're making it sit there and stay, and you are telling it it's no longer the mind, that you are the mind, and you're becoming conscious of those unconscious behaviors, and they're becoming familiar to you, well, now you're in a meditation to know thyself. And if you can look at the emotions that bring you to a lower denominator and notice them and not begin to experience them, but to observe them, the very act of observation means that you are no longer the program. You're the consciousness now observing the program, and you're beginning to objectify your subjective self. You are looking at yourself through the eyes of someone else, which means now you're no longer the old self. You're pure consciousness observing the old self. That's the first step in the meditative process. We have to light a match in a dark place and become so aware of how unaware we've been that we don't let any thought, any behavior, any emotion slip by our awareness unchecked. So then, if you're sitting in a meditation and you say, what is compassion? What is a better way to be in my life? How can I turn my life around? How can I feel better about myself? And you begin to think about what thoughts you do want to fire and wire in your brain. You begin to review the behaviors of how you are going to live in this new life. The act of rehearsing them mentally begins to change the brain from living in the past to living in the future. In other words, mental rehearsal is going to cause the brain to look like that experience has already occurred. So now your brain has a new installation of hardware. That's priming the brain for the future. If you do that enough times, over and over again, nerve cells that fire together, wire together, it'll begin to become familiar to you. And if you can cultivate the elevated emotion before the experience, in other words, the materialist, the person who's waiting for their wealth to come to feel abundance, they're living by that model of cause and effect. But the quantum model is about causing an effect, which means you begin to experience your own worthiness and your abundance before it occurs. If you can begin to reproduce that elevated emotion, or even healing or wholeness, when you reach that point where you're able to cultivate that emotion over and over again, it'll begin to become familiar to you. So the process of change in the meditative model requires unlearning and relearning. It requires breaking the habit of the old self and reinventing a new self. What we say in neuroscience, pruning synaptic connections and sprouting new connections, unfiring and unwiring and refiring and rewiring, unmemorizing emotions that are stored in the body and then reconditioning the body to a new mind and to a new emotion, no longer signaling the same genes in the same way, but signaling new genes in new ways. Beginning to pull your energy out of the past and beginning to invest your energy into the future. So we use the model of meditation because it's important for people to disconnect from their external environment. If you close your eyes and you eliminate all the distractions from your outer world, the people and things and places, all of a sudden your brain waves are going to begin to change. And you're going to have less attention on your outer world. And if you're seeing less and you're hearing less, and we play soft music in the background, you'll begin to pay attention to more of what you're thinking and less about what's going on in your life. If you sit your body down and you train it to be in one place without doing anything and experiencing the same events to create the same emotions, you're telling your body that it's no longer the mind, that you are the mind. And if you are no longer thinking about the predictable future or the familiar past, and you are present in the moment, that's the moment your inner world starts to become more real than the outer world. And that's the moment you can begin to make substantial changes in your own personal physiology. So the research that we've done, and we've measured over 3,500 brains in meditation, and I can tell you that without a doubt, that you're at your absolute best when you forget about yourself, when you get beyond yourself, when you become nobody, no one, no thing, no where, and no time. That's the moment you become pure consciousness. And that's the moment you're no longer living as a body in the environment and time. And consciousness is what actually executes and has the ability to change the brain and body in very unique ways. Now, we already know how to do this. It's just making it a skill. So then people spend the majority of their lives hoping and wishing and wanting and praying that there'll be some type of change within them. But what we're teaching people how to do is not to pray to have their prayers answered, but to get up from their meditations as if their prayers are already answered. Because when they're combining that clear intention of their future with that elevated emotion, they're literally changing their energy, they're changing their brain chemistry, they're changing the way their brain works, they're changing their genetic expression, they're changing their chemistry. They're literally becoming somebody else. And over again, when people do this, it may take them months to turn their disease around. But over and over again, we've seen this. They come back to a certain level of awareness, and the disease is no longer there. And it's almost like the disease existed in the old personality. They're literally someone else. And we've seen it enough times now to know that people reach a certain point with themselves where they feel so whole. They feel so satisfied with who they are. They feel so happy with themselves and their lives that they could care less if they have the disease. And that's the moment it goes away over and over again. So the other thing about meditation that's so important is that the purpose of meditation is to get beyond the analytical mind. Now, what separates the conscious mind from the subconscious mind is the analytical mind. And when we're driven by the hormones of stress, the very cocktail of chemicals that are created from those stress responses begin to cause our brains to become overly analytical. So the problem that most people have is that the moment they're in an emotional reaction, they tend to analyze their life within that emotion. And since that emotion is a record of the past, and the stress hormones are causing you to believe that your outer world is more real than your inner world, it drives the brain further out of balance. And so when you're under stress, you're focusing on objects. You're narrowing your focus on things, on people, on your environment, because that's where the danger is. You're preoccupied with your body because you believe that you're your body when you're under stress, because in antiquity you had to survive by taking care of your body. And you're preoccupied with time. So living by the hormones of stress causes us to focus on three things: the environment, our body, and time. And we begin to become materialists, and we define reality with our senses. So as we narrow our focus on things and objects, and we begin to believe the outer world is more real than the inner world, and we're trying to predict the future based on the past, we get in trouble because the brain gets more and more out of balance. So when the brain is receiving all these chemicals, it moves into a super aroused state. And that super aroused state then becomes common for most people, but it's like driving their sports car in first gear on the freeway. They stay in the state for extended periods of time. So then, when your focus is narrowed in objects and things and people, the danger is that the brain gets locked into this high state, super aroused state, and begins to become very conditioned into believing that what's in front of it is the real world. So why would you take your attention off of your external environment if there's a predator around the corner? Why would you open your heart and trust if you knew that there was danger there? Why would you want to learn when you should be running or fighting or hiding? And more than 70% of the time in the Western world, people spend the majority of their time living in stress. So it's the redundancy of that process that causes different networks of neurons to begin to compartmentalize. They begin to subdivide. And as the brain begins to become incoherent and begins to become out of balance, when our brain is incoherent, we're incoherent. And when our brain isn't working right, we're not working right. At the same time, the heart, which has its own little brain in it and its own little intelligence, begins to function incoherently as well. And the effect of that is it begins to send very aberrant signals to the body. So then in meditation, when you disconnect from your environment, when you get beyond your body, and you transcend linear time, and the inner world starts becoming more real than your outer world. The moment you forget that you're a name, that you're a gender, that you're a wardrobe, that you're a social security number, that you're a profession, that you're married, that you're single, that you're a vegetarian, the moment that you forget about who you are, your identity, your body, the things you own, the place you live, the place you're sitting, and you forget about time, all of a sudden, it's almost like the ego, the personality, is vacant. And when that occurs, all of a sudden, different compartments of the brain that were once subdivided begin to synchronize. We've measured this over and over again. And what syncs in the brain begins to link in the brain. So as different compartments and communities of neurons and neighborhoods of neurons begin to organize into coherence, into orderliness, you start feeling more whole and more like yourself. At the same exact time that we've seen this occur, all the energy that's sitting in the survival centers begins to move right up into the heart, and the person begins to fall in love with the moment. They feel connected to something greater. When we live by the hormones of stress and we're determining our reality with our senses as materialists, we experience separation from possibility. We think we're separate from everything. We're living in a realm where we're defining reality with our senses, and if we can't see it or smell it or taste it or feel it, it doesn't exist. That's what those chemicals do. But when the energy moves into the heart, it begins to produce a profound magnetic field. When you're living by the chemicals of stress, you're drawing from this vital field around your body, and it's turning into chemistry, and the field around your body begins to shrink. We've measured this, and now you become more matter and less energy, more particle and less wave. Now, this is the problem. When people are matter trying to change matter in their life, and it takes a certain amount of time to get what they want because they have to drag their body through space over and over again to finally reach their goals. They try to force the outcome. They try to predict the outcome. They try to control the outcome because instinctively they're matter trying to produce an effect in matter. When that energy moves into this center and the field around your body begins to expand, you're no longer taking from the field, you are now contributing to the field. When that heart starts to get coherent and starts getting rhythmic and starts getting organized, it's like dropping a pebble in water. It's producing a wave. And if you can sustain this state, you're dropping pebble after pebble after pebble, and it's creating waves that keep going out. You're sending a signal out into the field. If you can feel profoundly and deeply, if you can feel richly, you're dropping bigger stones in the water, and they're producing bigger waves. Now, all energy is frequency, and all frequency carries information. And if you had the intent of whatever it is that you wanted to be carried on that wave of energy, that elevated emotion, you would begin to broadcast a new signature into the field. And whatever you broadcast into the field is your experiment with destiny. And the longer your consciousness can linger in that energy, now you are calling your future to you. You are collapsing time, and space is moving towards you because you're creating from a realm beyond matter. You're more energy than matter in this realm. And when that occurs, when the brain is coherent and the heart is coherent, as the heart gets more organized and feels more coherent, it sends a profound signal to the brain. We analyze less, we trust more. We would never try to force the outcome or control the outcome. We trust the outcome because we feel connected to something greater. That state of being can be taught, and it can be sustained, and it can become a skill. And if you're able to regulate those states every single day, and able to get your brain and body working right before you present yourself out into the world, you'll be less likely to react to the people and conditions in your life. You'll less likely have your old habits and emotional reactions run who you are. And you'll less likely be thinking about the same predictable future or the familiar past because you'll be present in the moment. And that is when, that elegant state is when the miraculous and the uncommon begins to occur. And we've seen this in our workshops around the world where we've measured people's brains during meditation and their hearts. It is one of the most magical things you'll ever see. We can be looking at a monitor of a person's brain in real time during a meditation. And we're getting so good at this now because we can predict when it's going to happen. We'll see these little downloads from the field, ba-boom, ba-boom, and we start seeing them. We know something amazing is going to happen. And if we can look at a three-dimensional picture of the brain, all of a sudden we see the front of the brain talking to the back of the brain. We see the right side of the brain talking to the left side of the brain. We see different compartments of the brain beginning to synchronize. And when we start seeing that, we know that person is about ready to move into a whole brain state. The union of polarities is love. The two hemispheres coming together. The polarities, the duality of the two hemispheres uniting as one is love. It's when we start having that energy land right here, the center of oneness, the center of wholeness. The brain gets organized, the heart gets organized, and when we see that occurring, we can walk around and look at that person, and there are tears of joy running down their face because they are connected to something greater. And that intelligence that's giving us life, that's keeping our heart beating and digesting our food, that runs through the autonomic nervous system, it is the greatest healer in the world. All we have to do is get out of the way. And when we get out of the way, the operator, the tormentor, the personality who's instructing the body to stay in its limited states, once you're nobody, no one, no thing, no where, and no time, and the operator's gone, the autonomic nervous system begins to create order where there's disorder. It begins to do what it can do so well, which is create homeostasis and balance. It can begin to change chemistry. It can begin to change genes. It could begin to change neurological patterns. It could begin to move energy in the body. And the person always says the same thing. I didn't do any of the healing. It was the power within me that did the healing all along. All I had to do was just get out of the way. And so I think that we could only talk around these things, that you have to have the experience. But I think my passion really has been in the last few years in demystifying it. And so that if you see someone with a very serious health condition stand up in front of an audience of 550 people and tell their story about how they had, over time, created, by mismanaging their emotions and their energy, created a disease, and became conscious of how it happened, and then it took them 2 years to turn that battleship around, and every day, every single day, they made the choice to not get up from their meditation until they were somebody else. You're talking about greatness now, because this is no longer a philosophical concept. This is a person who is embodying it every single day. And they understand they're their own genetic engineer when they can get up in an elevated state. They understand when they do something differently or think differently or act differently, they're unfiring and unwiring, and they're selecting new networks of neurons and signaling new genes. They're assigning meaning to what they're doing. And if people can understand the what and the why, the how gets easier. So if you see somebody stand up in front of an audience of 500 people and explain their journey, it's no different than you watching somebody hit a tennis ball like Serena Williams, and you play tennis. If you keep watching, you are going to hit a tennis ball better. And we have people in our workshops stand up in front of audiences and tell their story. And it begins to give people permission to understand that it's possible for them to do the same. And just like an infection creates a disease amongst the community, I believe that health and wellness can be as infectious as disease once you get a group of people together that understand what they're doing and why.
This is a good time to talk about some of the people that came up,
Sure.
this, and maybe touch on, for some it might take 2 years, for some it might take 3 weeks.
There was a woman who handed me an envelope as I was walking off the stage in Barcelona a few years back. And she asked me to read it. And I went into the green room, and I opened the envelope, and I read this woman's story, and it was so profound that I had her come in front of the entire audience of 500 people and tell the story. She's a psychotherapist from Holland, a very intelligent woman. And on a Sunday morning, while she was in the shower, her husband said goodbye to his 2 children, yelled something to her while she was in the shower, and then went to the tallest building in Amsterdam and jumped off the building and committed suicide. Now, that is a stressful event. And when she got the news, she experienced all the emotions that people experience from something that's shocking and traumatic like that. She was suffering, she was in pain, she was resentful, she was guilty, she was confused, she was angry. She went through the whole gamut of emotions. And all of those emotions, by the way, are derived from the hormones of stress. So she has an event in her life, it changes her biologically. She doesn't know how to control her emotional reaction, it turns into a mood, one long emotional reaction. If you keep reviewing that event in your mind, you begin to produce the same chemistry in your brain and body as if the event was occurring. So her body is being conditioned to the past because she's reliving the experience 50 to 100 times in a day, and her body is beginning to believe it's in the same past experience over and over again. It ultimately goes from a mood to a temperament, and now people are asking her in her life, why are you so upset? She tells the story, and she's basically saying, I am this way because of this event that happened to me 4 months ago. So then, if we keep that going for extended periods of time, and those emotions are driving our thoughts, and we can't think greater than how we feel, our feelings have become the means of thinking, we're thinking in the past, and now we're stuck in our biology. So one day she wakes up, and she's completely paralyzed from her waist down. And she can't get out of bed, so they rush her to the hospital, they do MRIs, they do all the tests. They can't find anything significant with her, so they just diagnose her with neuritis. And so now she's bedridden, and she cannot literally get out of bed. So now she can't work, she can't take care of her children. Her mother has to move in with her, and she doesn't have any money because she's not working, and her stress levels go up. So now the condition gets worse. As her stress levels go up, it's the same chemicals of stress that are knocking the brain and body out of balance, signaling the wrong genes in the wrong way. And another few months later, she develops these huge ulcerations in all the mucous membranes of her body, in her mouth, her throat, her upper stomach, her bladder, her vagina, her anus. She's got these huge ulcers. Now she can't eat, and if she can't eat, she's knocking her body now out of chemical balance even more, and it hurts. So now she's spiraling downward, and then she finally starts noticing her symptoms getting worse, and she goes to the doctor, and they diagnose her with esophageal cancer. Now, the moment she gets the diagnosis of esophageal cancer, now she gets even more stressed, and she's in fear now, and she realizes that her children may not have a mom. And so she came to one of our workshops, and I remember specifically because she came in with crutches in a wheelchair and a walker, and she sat on the left side of the room. And it was an introductory level course, and she understood that she could change it intellectually, but she had a very big challenge ahead of her, and she realized how much she was in her past. And so, but she was excited about the content and the information. Now, remember, she's a psychotherapist, so this is the language that she understands. So she flew a few months later to an event that we did in Connecticut, just north of New York City. And she came with 2 friends, and the audience was amazing in this retreat. And so I pushed the audience a little further than where they normally would go, and she had a breakthrough. For the first time, she felt like herself in over a year. And she had a vision of her future. Like, she wasn't visualizing anything, she just got a very clear vision. And she was so excited that she went home and she did her meditation every single day. Now, she understood that she had to upregulate new genes and downregulate genes that had to do with her disease, and that every day she had to knock on the genetic door. Now, The first thing I want to say is that I'm certain that there were days that she didn't feel like doing her meditation. And she did that anyway. She did it anyway. There were days where she had a tremendous amount of doubt and she didn't think it was possible, but she did her meditations every single day. And as she began to do her meditations every single day, she started to notice significant changes in her health. Well, she stood on the stage in front of that audience and she said, I just came from my doctor last week. I have no evidence of esophageal cancer. I have no ulcerations in any of the mucous membranes of my body, except a small scar in the back of my throat. I have no paralysis, no numbness, no loss of motor function, and I have a new husband. And I said, new personality, new personal reality. The disease exists in the old personality. You're literally someone else. And I said, when you look back at that event that took place in your past, how do you feel? And she said, it was my greatest teacher. And I said, do you have any emotion when you think about that event? And she said, no. And I said, the memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom. And that's the name of the game here. You're ready for a new life. And she said, you know, I'm so in love with my life. But she made the choice to not get up from her meditations until she was in love with life. Now, to the materialist, to the person who's defining reality with their senses, they would say she has no reason to be in love with life. She lost her husband to suicide, she lost her job, she can't take care of her kids, she's paralyzed, she has cancer, she has all these different conditions. But she made the choice then that every single day she was going to condition her body into the future instead of into the past. And she stood in front of that audience and she said, I am so in love with life. And I said, of course you are. You created your life from the place called being in love with life. So, because of her and the choices that she made to overcome herself and not be defined by the past, and working on it every single day she overcame some aspect of herself, a little bit more, surrendered an aspect of her limited self to create a greater self, to remove the masks and the emotions and the facade that block the flow of the intelligence within us. When every day she was making contact with that power within her, sooner or later it began to get the right instructions. And she went from being a very sick person to a very healthy person. So that person to me is a light to the world. To me, she's closer to the truth than any scholar, any academic. She lived it. And other people, as a result of it, with ovarian cancers and other conditions, have heard her story and have given them the strength, to do the same in their lives. So
you touched on there was days that she didn't feel like it. There was days, but she did it. So how do you fight through the pain?
This is a great question because, again, we can talk about the philosophy of all of this, but when you're sick, the most difficult part about being sick is being able to think greater than how you feel. And if you can't think greater than how you feel, then your body is dictating your life. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, but let's just say that a person has mismanaged their energy and mismanaged their emotions and mismanaged their lifestyle for the last 10 years. And ultimately, they develop some type of condition. Well, it was the continuous imbalance that was knocking on the genetic door that finally programmed the gene into sickness. So it took them 10 years to finally create that condition. Then we have to be real here and understand that it's going to take some time to knock on the genetic door and begin to reprogram the gene in a new way. So it's not like you do your meditation 2 days and you expect to be healed. That it's a process and it's a skill, and it requires repetition, and it requires understanding, and requires regrouping and relearning, and requires filling your brain with knowledge, and it requires staying consistent with it. to begin to see some effects. And it's just like catching a fish. The moment you hook one, the moment you notice some change in your body, the moment something begins to change, that's all you need. Because once you get that feeling, that sensation, you're going to correlate what you're doing inside of you with the effect that you produce outside of you. And you're going to start doing it with more passion and more sincerity and more absolute certainty. So the cool thing about all of this is that, let's just say you're able to change your brain waves and get beyond your analytical mind because you've been practicing your meditation every single day. And let's say that you reach that elegant moment of the generous present moment, the now, where you forget about your appointments, you forget about your relationships, you forget about all the things you did yesterday. You're so present in the moment that you're not a face any longer, that you're not a body, that you're not an identity, that you don't own anything. You're pure consciousness. That's the moment your consciousness merges with a greater consciousness. And that is the moment when your conscious mind begins to merge with your subconscious mind, that you're in the operating system where true change can take place. So if you're practicing overcoming your body every single day in a meditation and you're sick, then when you sit down in your meditation, you should be able to get beyond your awareness of being a body. And if you're able to do that, then your body is no longer the mind, and you can begin to work with your body and recondition it to a new mind. If you don't have the ability to get beyond your body in a meditation, then you're your body trying to change your body. You're matter trying to change matter, and it produces very slow effects over time. Now, it will produce some effects, but it's going to take some time. So then if you're practicing your ability to regulate and change your brainwaves and get beyond your body, get beyond your identity, get beyond space and time, if you do that really well, when it comes time for you to heal your body and you have the ability to get beyond your body, no matter how sick it is, every time you get beyond your body, you are consciousness with a certain energy instructing your body, not from the body, but from an epiphenomenological place, which is greater than your body. So I think that, again, to demystify the process, it requires some training. When people start getting to that point where they get beyond themselves, that's when the magic happens over and over again. So yeah, in the beginning, it's going to be difficult because you're in a body, and then you start doing the meditations, and then you look to see, am I any better? The moment you start looking to see if you're better, you've just returned back to the old self. The new self would never look to see if it was better. It's already staying in that state. So it's a process. It's a process of development. It's a process of action. It's a process of awareness. It's a process. It takes time. But we've seen it so many times now that I can say now it's becoming a law.
So talk to me about the placebo effect.
So how is it that you can give someone a sugar pill, a saline injection, or perform some false surgery or treatment, and a certain percentage of those people will accept, believe, and surrender to the thought that they're getting the actual substance or treatment, and they begin to program their autonomic nervous system to make their own pharmacy of chemicals that matches the exact same chemical they think they're taking. So the question is it the inert substance that's doing the healing, or is it the body's innate capacity to heal? The sugar pill, the inert substance, is not doing the healing. It's the thought that's doing the healing. But that pill, based on conditioning, is a symbol that represents possibility in someone's future. We can call that an intent. A certain percentage of those people will begin to become inspired, enthusiastic, and theos, filled with God. They'll begin to become hopeful. They'll begin to give thanks that it could possibly work. And all they're doing is combining a clear intention with an elevated emotion. And in that moment, they're moving from the biology of their past into the biology of their future. So then the question is, do you need the sugar pill or the saline injection or some false treatment to move into a new state of being? But instead of selecting a known in your life to help you heal, can you select an unknown, a new potential in the quantum field without anything outside of you, and begin to revisit that unknown over and over again until you make it known in your biology? Is it possible that you'll begin to produce the same effects? And the answer is absolutely yes. So in depression studies, where people are given a placebo, 81% of the people that are given a placebo respond as well to the placebo as they would to an antidepressant. So what's the significance of that? It means they're making their own pharmacy of antidepressants, and their body and nervous system is the greatest pharmacist in the world. So then, yeah, it's true that the people in the depression studies had to take the placebo for 6 or 8 weeks. And every day, combining a clear intention and elevated emotion, moving into a new state of being, accepting, believing, and surrendering to the idea, the thought, that they're getting the real substance, began to program their biology to change. So if it takes 6 weeks to heal depression by moving into a new state of being, it may be a good idea to understand it may take you 6 to 8 weeks by moving into a new state of being every single day to finally change some condition within you. So then, the beauty behind the placebo is that it's based on belief. And most people's beliefs are created from past experiences. So you have an experience or series of experiences in your life that brand you neurologically and emotionally condition you. And we tend to think and feel within the biology of our past experiences. So if how you think and how you feel creates a state of being, if you combine a thought and a feeling, a thought and a feeling, a thought and a feeling, that's called an attitude. You have a series of good thoughts that are connected to a series of good feelings, you have a good attitude. You have a series of negative thoughts that are connected to some bad feelings, you have a bad attitude. So attitudes are kind of shortened states of being. Good attitude in the morning, bad attitude in the afternoon. If you take attitudes, 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 and you string them together, you start creating a belief. So a belief, then, is just a thought you keep thinking over and over again till you hardwire it in your brain. And the very boundaries of our beliefs are our feelings. And when our beliefs get challenged, it typically doesn't feel right. So then if how you think and how you feel creates a state of being, and the repetition of thinking and feeling over time conditions the body to subconsciously become the mind, then all beliefs are subconscious states of being. People don't even know they have beliefs about medicine or about God or about relationships or about love or about gender because they've been programmed subconsciously. If you take beliefs and you string beliefs together, a belief, you form what's called perceptions. And perceptions have everything to do with the choices we make, the things we create in our life, the relationships we have, and even the behaviors that we demonstrate. And in fact, if you want to study someone's beliefs, study their behaviors, because they'll tell you volumes of information about themselves. So then, if you're programmed into believing that you need something outside of you to heal, then that becomes your belief. And of course, you're going to need something to help you to heal. If you believe that you need a flu shot so that you don't get the flu, well, the fact that you're believing that you need the flu shot, whether you get the flu shot or not, you're more than likely going to get sick anyway. So when I wrote The Placebo, I was so fascinated with the concept because I began to realize how programmed we really are unconsciously. When you start studying the placebo, you begin to realize that there's so many studies to prove over and over again that it is in fact our innate ability to heal. If you take a group of people that have asthma and you have a drug that induces asthma and you have a drug that takes it away, and you give the person the drug that induces asthma, and you tell them that you're giving them the drug that takes the asthma away, more than half of those people will not have a response to the bronchial constrictor. In other words, the thought was more powerful than the chemical. So then, if people begin to unravel this concept, and they begin to realize that they have the innate capacity to heal, and that they can work by changing and regulating their internal states, they're going to begin to produce their own pharmacy of chemicals for pain, for depression, for antibodies or inflammation. And we did an amazing study just a little ways back in Tacoma, Washington at one of our advanced workshops. We took 120 people and we wanted to measure their circulating cortisol levels and a chemical called immunoglobulin A, or IgA. So when you're stressed and you're out of balance, your cortisol levels go up. And cortisol levels are the highest at around 8 in the morning. So we selected a specific time in the afternoon to measure 120 people's cortisol levels when they came to our advanced workshop. We got the measurements, and we measured their IgA levels as well. We put them through 4.5 days of training, and at the end of 4.5 days, we measured to see if there were any epigenetic changes or chemical changes that took place by their internal work. We found that the majority of people's cortisol levels diminished, which means they were no longer in survival, they were no longer stressed. But the relevant thing that happened was that their IgA levels went from about 51.5 to 83, right to the ceiling of what's considered high, and some people were up in the hundreds. Now, IgA is the primary defense against bacteria and viruses. It's greater than any flu shot. And when you begin to create an elevated emotion like gratitude or appreciation or care or kindness or inspiration, you begin to activate the immune system, and the immune system begins to create order where there is once disorder. It begins to release all kinds of different chemicals that begin to regenerate and restore the body. It turns out that those chemicals stay active for the remainder of the day with just 10 minutes of just an elevated emotion. So we started every single meditation in the advanced workshop by creating elevated emotional states and being able to sustain them. And we measured it with a HRV monitor. We measured people's hearts while they were doing it. And interestingly enough, the majority of those people were able to create that kind of heart coherence that began to create a strong electromagnetic field, that began to produce a strong chemical change, a strong physiological change, and now their inner environment was more resistant or more orderly than anything in their external environment. So then, if you do that enough times, every single day, then you should no longer be subjected to those opportunistic bacteria, because they're called opportunistic bacteria because they're waiting for an opportunity for your immune system to be compromised. And it's no wonder that a group of people that are all working in a corporation or a department in some company all get sick at the same time. It's not the bugs that's creating the disease. It's their immune system is compromised because they're all stressed at the same time that allows the bacteria to begin to proliferate within them. So giving people the science and understanding of how the placebo works, is it possible then to teach it? And the placebo is based on 3 things. Conditioning. You give someone a pill, they notice a change in their internal state. You give them a pill again, it takes away their pain. You give them a pill again, it takes their pain away. You give them the pill, but this time it's an inert substance that looks just like the other pill. By conditioning, their body begins to make the same chemicals. The second thing in the placebo is called expectation. You begin to expect something to occur. The moment you select that potential, that possible known in your future, your body begins to physiologically change in preparation for the event. And if 40 to 50% of people that are diagnosed with cancer, that are told that they're going to get nauseous on their first chemotherapy treatment, get nauseous on their drive to their first chemotherapy treatment, they're expecting that outcome. Their brain and body are in that future reality. But instead of doing it that way, is it possible that 40 or 50% of the people can get well on their drive to work in anticipation of something wonderful happening? And changing that, using the same principle but changing the biology to produce an effect, begins to cause some very significant changes. Because you can say to a person, in a placebo study. We're going to give you a drug, and if the doctor's enthusiastic, it works better. That's going to take away your pain. And they're all enthusiastic, and the person begins to anticipate their pain going away. They begin to make their own morphine, and of course they'd have no reaction to the stimulus that creates the pain. The third thing is assigning meaning to something. So if you say, hey, you know, here's the receptors on the end of your nerve cells, and serotonin has to be picked up in the synaptic space, and this chemical keeps serotonin there so it'll remove depression, and you're looking at the charts and you're assigning meaning to why you're taking this pill, you'll produce a better result. But if you teach people then how to condition their body to a new mind, that's the placebo. If you teach them how to, instead of select the worst thing that could happen in their life, select the most amazing thing that could happen in their life and emotionally embrace it, just like they create anxiety, they could create wellness or healing or health. And if you can assign meaning to what they're doing and teach them why we're using science as the contemporary model to explain and demystify it, it's not enough for them to just intellectually understand it. They have to turn to someone next to them. They have to be able to speak it. They have to be able to say it. So in our workshops, they learn information and then they interact with each other, and I ask them to explain it. If they can explain it, it's wired in their brain. Now we're installing the hardware, so when it comes time to the instruction, and we set up the conditions in the environment for them to practice, if they can get their behaviors to match their intentions by combining those three things, they should have some type of transformation. And we've measured the transformation over and over again, and it's beginning to become a new scientific law. And I really think that we shouldn't wait for science to give us permission to do the uncommon. I think we should go out and do the uncommon and do it repeatedly, and then have science come and study us and begin to change their laws. And yeah, this is not normal, and this isn't natural, but we're talking about supernatural here. We're talking about breaking outside of the conventional model. And it's going to take a certain amount of courage to begin to say, okay, I've been given this diagnosis. The doctor told me I had 6 months to live and to get my affairs in order. And I can't tell you how many people in our work were given the voodoo curse, that you had 6 months or 3 months to live, to get your papers in order, your affairs in order, and you won't live. And those people didn't accept, believe, and surrender to those thoughts without any analysis to program their autonomic nervous system into that destiny. They said, wait a second, okay, I think I can make a change here. And some of them either don't have the disease, or they're living 2 years later and they're still making their way. And I think that it's important for people to take a certain amount of their power back. And here's the reason why. We're in an age of information. And in an age of information, ignorance is a choice. 25, 30 years ago, you went to the doctor and she told you you had a certain condition, and she said, this is the procedure, the surgery that you're going to need. And most people just signed on the dotted line and just said, okay, I'll get the procedure. Fast forward to today, someone's given a diagnosis. The doctor tells them what their treatment options are. And they go home and they get on their internet and they begin to research that condition for hours, looking at conventional and non-conventional treatments and modalities. And some people know more about ways to treat this than some physicians. And they walk back into the doctor's office and they say, hey, I have this idea. I want to try this therapy, or I want to try this. And the doctor either says, I don't know anything about that, or I don't think that works. And people are now looking at their doctors and saying, time to find a new doctor. I want to find somebody that's going to support me in the type of lifestyle I want to live, and see if I can make the change. Now, there's a caveat to this, and we tell all of our students that are making changes, you have to measure. In other words, if you are going to go on this journey, this is not about denial. This is about information, which means if your values are high or your scans show this, let's go for 3 months and let's see what you're able to do. At the end of 3 months, we measure. If it's staying the same or getting better, we keep going and we may add 1 or 2 other things. If you're getting worse, then you have to take a little bit more of a radical procedure to help you make that specific type of change. So This isn't about negligence. This isn't about burying the information. This is about really seeing if you can produce some type of effect. And measuring then lets you know, because it's feedback. And it's the feedback over time that lets us know that what we're doing is beginning to produce changes, and we keep doing it so the person begins to change fundamentally.
Just to expand on that a little bit, you said that a concern of yours is that we live in a world where scientific research is commingled with self-interests and often influenced by profits. Can you just touch on why some people shouldn't accept the woman in the white coat's diagnosis, because maybe they don't have all the information, or their education comes from a pharmaceutical company? Or
Well, I have nothing against pharmaceutical companies. I have nothing against drugs, because they've done amazing jobs in helping people restore their health because they move back into chemical balance. The problem that I have is that I'm not certain that we're given the truth about how powerful we really are, because the moment that cat is out of the bag, you sell less products and you sell less drugs. I question, number one, the efficacy of all drugs. I question what research papers are being published and which ones that don't produce substantial evidence that the drug works never ever makes it into the scientific pool. And so if there's 38 particular papers that were written on a certain drug, you may only find maybe 19 or 18 of those actually published, and the other ones that don't show any market results never get published. So I think there's a transparency that's beginning to happen because people can become informed and they can find out for themselves. We can only accept, believe, and surrender to thoughts that are equal to our emotional state. And we will not accept, believe, and surrender to any thoughts that are not equal to your emotional state. So when a person shows up in a doctor's office and they're given the diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis or MS or cancer or diabetes, once they hear that diagnosis, the common emotions they experience is either fear or sadness or pain. So the moment they feel fear, the moment they feel sadness from the diagnosis, from that experience, they can think positively all they want. They can say, I'm going to overcome this condition. But if they are feeling fear, that thought never makes it past the brainstem into the body because it's not in alignment with the body's emotional state. You get that person to change their emotional state and get them into a state of gratitude. Why gratitude? Well, we normally give thanks when we get something. But if you're giving thanks in a state of gratitude, your body is believing it's receiving something because the emotional signature of gratitude means it's already happened. So when a person is beginning to experience gratitude and they're not waiting for their healing, they're feeling gratitude because they can cultivate that emotional state. They're more prone to accept, believe, and surrender to the thoughts equal to that emotional state, and they begin to program their autonomic nervous system into a different destiny. Now, I've run a very busy integrated health clinic for the last 30 years, and we treat a lot of chronic conditions in my clinic. I was in there yesterday, and it's very busy. And people come to us because we are interested in creating a lifestyle change. Less than 5% of the people on the planet are born with genetic conditions. The other 95%, their diseases are created from lifestyle and behaviors and choices. So the medical model works really great for acute conditions. You know, like if you break your arm or you have appendicitis, it's a good idea to seek emergency medical care. But when it comes to chronic conditions that require a lifestyle change, a lot of times it's not enough just to take a chemical, because the person may have some old emotional scars, that person may be in a bad situation in their life, there could be their exposure to certain chemicals or choices that they're making that are actually continuously weakening the body's state. So here's the formula that we use for people that are interested in making significant changes. You have 3 types of stress: physical, chemical, and emotional, which means you have 3 types of balance: physical, chemical, and emotional. So then what are the things that we do to create physical balance in our body? It could be anything from yoga to aerobic exercise to acupuncture to chiropractic to massage, anything that's physical that helps your body get back into homeostasis. what are the chemical things that you can do? All right, well, if your immune system is beat up because of the hormones of stress, and next to orgasm and the stress response, digestion takes quite a bit of energy, well, maybe just eat foods that are going to be less difficult to break down so you can use more energy for growth and repair. So you start eliminating certain foods that are going to knock your brain and body out of balance. You have more energy going for growth and repair, and you get the person more chemically balanced, and you use enzymes, or they modify their diets, or they eat less, or they eliminate certain foods. They may or may not take a pharmaceutical, or they may take extra nutraceuticals. That helps create chemical balance in their body. And then what about emotional balance, right? Meditation is, for us, the greatest model that we use, but we also use a lot of modalities that have to do with energy psychology for certain people that we treat. And when we get 2 out of those 3 in order, the third one typically always comes around. You get someone more physically balanced and more chemically balanced, they're going to be more emotionally balanced. You get someone more emotionally balanced and more chemically balanced, they're going to be more physically balanced. You get someone more physically balanced, more emotionally balanced, they're going to be more chemically balanced. It's the way it is. So you get 2 out of those 3 in order. Over time, the third one begins to come around. And so that's a kind of a solid model when it comes to the practice of maintaining a certain level of health and helping people to get from one station to another.
I love the concept of infinite possibilities. Can you talk about how a doctor's opinion is just one possibility in a field of infinite possibilities?
When people get a diagnosis, the diagnosis and the prognosis is based on normal or natural. So when you look at people that are at the whim of the conditioning of how they should live their life, the moment they get that diagnosis and they're subjected to the same treatments, then the majority of people respond in the same way because they're giving their power away to something outside of them. But a diagnosis and a prognosis is one potential in the infinite field of possibilities. And so this is a very sensitive subject when it comes to ethics, because I think that doctors are now becoming more compassionate with patients and understanding that they want to give them hope and they want to support them in their health goals. It's important for people to understand when they're given a diagnosis that if they fall prey to the prognosis without actually considering that there's other options, without actually realizing that they may have to do something differently, that they may have to make new choices, that they are going to have to get beyond certain emotions and overcome their limited thinking. If they can understand that if they're able to do that, more possibilities open up as a result of their own personal changes, that's when you start to see all kinds of magical things start to appear in the person's life. Their life gets longer. Their pain goes away. The quality of their life improves. You start seeing biological, neurological, chemical, hormonal changes beginning to take place. So again, education is so important for people to understand that in the spectrum of the quantum world, there are infinite possibilities that exist in the present moment. So if you have the ability to practice being present and truly not thinking about what could happen in your future or what's happened in your past, but truly practice every single day in that process, that inward journey of getting present. If you keep doing that, if there is no predictable future and there is no familiar past and you're in the present moment, there should be possibilities that you haven't considered before. The beauty behind all of that means that the moment you are open to possibility and you're no longer focusing on knowns or familiars in your life, that's the moment you start experiencing those synchronicities, those serendipities, those coincidences that are happening all around you because you're no longer investing your energy in a predictable future or a familiar past. And I think that you can teach that. And I think when people really start centering themselves and practicing that, they should expect the unexpected in their life. They should expect unknown events to begin to occur, possibilities that they haven't thought of. Because if they thought of them, they would have done them, and it would have been a known. But so we have to stretch out into that world of possibilities, which is the unknown. And I'm interested in that supernatural process. I believe in human potential, and I've witnessed transformation and healings enough times to say that anybody can do it if they're given the proper instruction.
So what is your one takeaway message?
I'm going to assume that the expression of this divine intelligence within us is the expression of life, which is equal to the health of the body. And that I think when we take time out of our busy lives to invest in ourselves, to become a work in progress, to begin to decide what thoughts we no longer want to think, what behaviors we'd like to change, what emotions we want to transform, and every single day make an effort to remove the blocks and the masks, the facades that stop the flow of the divine in us. When we begin to do that kind of work, that intelligence begins to move through us, and that's when we become more like it. We become more willful. It has an amazing will. We become more mindful. It has an infinite mind. We become more conscious. It's a consciousness. We become more loving. It's a loving intelligence. We become more giving. It's a giver of life. I think its nature begins to become our nature. Its mind begins to become our mind. And the side effect of that, I think, was we move from this selfish state to this selfless state. And transformation does something really amazing. When you free yourself from the chains of those emotions that keep you anchored in the past, and you go from particle to wave, from matter to energy, and you begin to liberate energy, and your heart starts to open, and you feel one or connected to something greater. There's only one thing you want to do when you feel this way, and that is you want to give. You say, I feel so amazing. I want you to feel the way I feel. And so the natural tendency is to give something away because you feel so whole in that moment that it's impossible to want. Now, why would you want when you're whole? Now, that to me is the natural state of being. Disease can't exist in that state of holism. And I think that it's reachable in our lives, and I think that people can reach those elegant states, and it can begin to become more constant. So how do we become supernatural, then, is the question. And that is, we have to start doing what feels unnatural. In the beginning, of course, change is going to be uncomfortable. It's going to feel unfamiliar. There's going to be some uncertainty. You can't predict when you step into the unknown what that's like. And most people rush back to their familiar feelings and familiar behaviors, and they say, this feels right. No, it feels familiar. Becoming comfortable in that unknown, where the best way to predict your future is to create it, and be able to create from that place of the unknown begins to produce supernatural effects in our lives. So then, giving when everybody else is in lack is supernatural. Demonstrating compassion when everybody's angry and judgmental is supernatural. Showing signs of love and strength and courage when everybody else is in fear. I think if we keep doing what feels unnatural, sooner or later we'll begin to become supernatural. And this is a time in history right now where people are looking for answers, and they secretly believe in themselves. And I think that belief in ourselves and belief in the infinite possibilities makes life really exciting. So when our will matches that intelligence within us as well, when our mind matches its mind, and when our love for life matches its love for life, I think it always answers the call.